Good evening, everyone, and welcome to WBUR's virtual town hall. I'm Zeninjor Enwemeka, and I'm a business reporter at WBUR. This town hall is a partnership with the Boston Club, an organization that works to advance the role of women in top leadership positions. Don't forget to subscribe to the WBUR YouTube channel to get notified anytime we release a new video, and click the bell icon right next to the subscribe button to get notified whenever we go live. Tonight's discussion is about how businesses have responded to some of the challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's been a huge demand for personal protective equipment, or PPE, during this pandemic, but it's been hard to get. Tonight, we'll talk to three Boston-based companies that have stepped in to provide critical supplies to hospitals during the pandemic. We're joined by Jane Carpenter, who leads global communications at Wayfair, the Fortune 500 e-commerce company known for selling furniture and other home goods. Hi, Jane. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Wambi Rose, the co-founder and CEO of LovePop, which creates artistic laser-cut pop-up greeting cards. Hi, Wambi. Thanks for being here.
Hello there. Glad to be here.
And also joining us tonight is Romina Bongiovanni, the head of global communications and partner initiatives at New Balance, the sports apparel and footwear brand. Hi, Romina. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And viewers, we want you to be part of this conversation too. We're taking your questions at slido.com. The event code is WBURVTH10. We already have some questions submitted, so we'll try to get to as many as possible. Also, check out the YouTube live chat to talk to others who are watching and exchange ideas. Now, panelists, all of your companies have pivoted to provide much needed supplies to hospitals during this pandemic. And I want to know how you were able to do that. Romina, let's start with you. How did New Balance go from making running shoes to making masks?
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about it. New Balance has a fearless, independent mindset. So our values really, truly lead our way to find positive ways to contribute and be part of the solution, especially during this pandemic. But it truly was our culture and the determination of our teams that made it different and further define our purpose during this time of crisis. So it has been really interesting. Right after putting all the safety measures in place for the well-being of our associates and our customers, then we went on to developing what internally we call Made Medical. And at that point, we understood the shortage of PPE was critical. And we had the capabilities in place to help solve some of those problems. So a team of engineers, developers, designers, very skilled manufacturing associates worked on a prototype for a facial mask and actually created that prototype in just 4 days.
And I believe we have some pictures of that.
Yeah, it was a really special moment. We went on to serving these facial masks to the healthcare community. And then, of course, our leadership continued to work with state officials and the medical community to fine-tune it. We were very, very lucky to work with MIT, with Brigham Women's, with MGH, with many others, really, to test the product and shape it in a way that made sense.
Okay, so it sounds like you had a lot of partners in this initiative. Now, Wambi, you're a startup. You have a much smaller company. How did LovePop go from making 3D pop-up greeting cards to making medical gowns and face shields?
Yeah, as you mentioned, what we do every day is we design 3D works of art, paper engineering, which involves a lot of laser cutting and putting things together. But ultimately at heart, right, we're a creative engineering and design company, and as soon as we heard about what was happening and saw the need, we thought about what could we potentially do, and we really didn't know, but we knew we had that design capability and the manufacturing capability. And so we reached out to a couple of places and got connected into the Partners Healthcare Working Groups, as well as the Massachusetts Manufacturing Emergency Response Team at the state, and kind of worked together 24/7 just figuring out what we could do, ultimately landed on making face shields and then non-surgical isolation gowns. And so at this point, the non-surgical isolation gowns are really what we're primarily focused on. So we've shipped about 400,000 units out of roughly 2 million that we're currently in production on.
Okay. And Jane, Wayfair is known for selling furniture. So how did the company start providing mattresses and linens to hospitals?
So our first priority right out of the gate was the safety of our employees and our customers. So we were very focused on that and making sure that our folks were operating in a safe manner. And that put us in a really strong position to be able to offer help to the community because we had our transportation up and running, our operations, our warehousing. We were in a position where we could help. And we immediately reached out to a variety of state, local, federal organizations to offer our support. And we were able to provide supplies for a number of field hospital operations around the country. In Boston, New Orleans, worked on a great project with Boston Medical Center, set up housing for homeless patients that had tested positive for COVID and needed a place to recuperate and recover. So, the fact that we were able to very quickly implement strict, extensive safety protocols across our network and have our folks be safe and have our operations up and running, strong position to help the community. That's really what oriented our work, and is still doing that today.
And Jane, what Wayfair did is a bit different than New Balance and Lovepop, where you weren't creating these products, you weren't manufacturing them, but you were making these supplies available, correct?
That's correct. And I think what's important to note is, so we uniquely have the capability to get, 1,000 bedside tables to the field hospital set up in Boston, or 800 tray tables to New Orleans, or whatever it may be, mattresses to the National Services in London, where they were setting up a field hospital there. So we have the capability to get those types of products to the places where they need to be there. And so that was really great. It was super rewarding for our team because our team, across the board, all of our operations, they felt really great about having a part in this and being able to help the community. So we're super proud to do that work and some other things that we can get into later.
Yeah. So, Wambi, I know you mentioned how many supplies that Lovepop has been able to provide. I want to ask the same question to Romina and James and Jane. So, Romina, how much of the supplies, how many of the face masks was New Balance able to provide, and where exactly are those face masks going to?
Yes, absolutely. So. We actually started with the prototype and delivered facial masks for the healthcare community late in March. And just last week, early June, we have been able to reach a big milestone. We actually manufacture and assemble 1 million masks in our factories in New England in the last 2.5 months. So it's been a terrific effort and certainly a remarkable result of the manufacturing team and those really, the leaders behind this experience that really transform our footwear factory line into making a product we didn't know that we will be making 3 months ago. And so they were distributed to areas around New England, as well as St. Louis, where our associates live and work. So we prioritize those areas first.
Okay. And Jane, how much of the supplies was Wayfair able to provide? How much of the linens, the hospital beds?
Yeah, it just depended on the different locations, but usually it was pretty large. Because you can imagine if you're setting up a hospital, you're going to need thousands of items for those facilities. So really across the spectrum, based on the different locations. I think some of the other things that we got involved with that I think are really exciting and continuing today, one program I want to mention is an initiative we launched to support our employees in the field who are out there on the front lines every day. thing, beyond the recognition pay and all of that we were already doing, but another way to help recognize those folks. And we came up with a program that not only helped them, but actually designed to give back to the local communities. So we are in 50 plus locations in North America, and we were able to design this program that would actually help support local small businesses in particular that have been struggling through this pandemic. And that's called Dinner to Go that we launched, that's started in April, and it's going to continue through the end of the year. That basically is giving free meals to our employees in the field twice a week for them and their families, and all delivered from local small businesses, restaurants that were, having to close or lay off people, due to the pandemic, and we were able to start funneling them hundreds of orders a week. So that's a really cool program that's ongoing and allowing us to really help in those communities.
Okay. And Wambi, I want to bring you into this because I'm curious, where and how did you source the materials that you needed to create the supplies that you were able to pivot to?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our core product is making paper laser cut art. So we have 400 people in Da Nang in Vietnam in our own production facility where we usually create this, and that team is very used to working on kind of high precision quality because every time you open a laptop it has to work right. So they started. They started figuring out what could we do, and we're just prototyping everything there. And ultimately, we found a handful of local manufacturers who are making the material for raincoats and repurposing that production for hospital gowns. And at this point, we're on the 7th version of that design, kind of working hand in hand with the hospitals to add the specific features that weren't really present in the gowns as much prior to COVID, because in the COVID scenario, it's much more about protecting the healthcare worker, whereas typically a lot of this PPE is for protecting the patient. So we've learned a ton just in that kind of rapid iteration process, and kind of our entire team has come together and been working around how do we put all the pieces together to do something totally new.
Okay. And a good follow-up question here we have from Slido. This is an audience question from Lauren, who is asking, for companies shifting to mask and face shield production, how much effort must be invested in design? Have standard designs been made available to simplify things? So I guess Romita and Wambi, those are probably a question for you both.
Yeah. I will say I'm not the expert to talk about that part of the process, certainly, but I know that, it will require the skills of somebody that understands manufacturing needs, as well as design and product development. I think one thing that was very important for us was to deliver a mask that actually had multiple layers, and all the layers worked together for the benefit of the user. And also protect everyone around it, right? So it was all the different layers and materials that were selected that actually made it work in a much better way.
And Wambi, how about for you?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's a lot of effort, especially because this is a much more highly regulated area than our normal business. And so the team at the Massachusetts Manufacturing Emergency Response Team has been amazing. There were days where we spoke 3 or 4 times in the same day, just as the FDA's emergency use authorizations were changing so quickly. And I think one of the pieces on those, you asked the question of are there existing designs out there? We started with an FDA design. We were given some additional designs by some of the material manufacturers, but then working with the folks on the front line, we were able to iterate those. And so at least the way we've approached it, it's been a pretty intensive kind of rapid design process. And even the stock designs that we started with, had some challenges that we had to work out in order to make them really useful.
Okay. If you're just joining us, we are live streaming this WBUR Town Hall on the role and responsibilities of businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic with Romina Bongiovanni of New Balance, Jane Carpenter of Wayfair, and Wambi Rose of Lovepop. Now, panelists, was there anything that, and you've touched on this a little bit so far in terms of just the amount of partners and different places and organizations that you worked with to make this possible. I'm wondering what helped make, if you can talk in more detail about what helped make it possible. Were there state and federal grants that allowed you to make this pivot to provide this protective equipment? Wambi, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most helpful, I've already mentioned them a couple times over at the Massachusetts Manufacturing Emergency Response Team, MERT. They've been fantastic. The folks over at Partners who are testing all of our new versions as they come out. The folks at Mount Sinai in New York, where we've delivered a very substantial number of gowns and who originally kind of pioneered this material for this concept, at least with respect to our efforts, have been amazing. And then, another group that really need to mention is our investors. We've had multiple investors make donations of substantial quantities of PPE to local institutions and organizations. One of our investors, Bob Davis, actually donated 100,000 gowns in Massachusetts. So we've had substantial support from our board and our investors to take on something that's really kind of very far outside of our core business to meet this need.
And Romina, what about at New Balance? I mean, I know the governor was just touring the New Balance factory in Lawrence just last week. So can you talk a bit more about if there are any sort of state, federal grants or what all went into making this possible?
I think it was certainly a collective effort. It has been in partnership with the state, no doubt, and many of the institutions throughout New England that were able to partner up with us and consult and really help us deliver a product that was useful and necessary. But I think it also came from top level commitment, right, within the organization. It wasn't just a matter of like producing a product and trying things out and serving the community, but it was a long-term commitment to define our purpose through our actions. And our capabilities, certainly in manufacturing, is what we do best, right? That's our core. It's part of our NDA, so it's been a long journey, but it came directly from the top in terms of the commitment to make this happen. And it wasn't just the PPE, right? But it was the alignment with the New Balance Foundation that made it all possible in terms of like delivering the PPE, as well as $2 million in grants to vulnerable communities out there. And the work that they've been doing for the past 40 years that really established the foundation for everything New Balance stands for and how we contribute to the community. So it's a long journey. We also rely heavily on our partners at the sports marketing level, our athletes, our ambassadors for the brand, people like Coco Gauff or Jaden Smith that really jump in to help and deliver this PPE to people that are in need, that will use it the most and will benefit immediately.
Okay. And Jane?
So our scenario is a little different because we did not make a new product or start producing something that we don't normally produce. I will say, really, again, it's our employees that made this all possible, right? We had all of our, we're coming to work every day in the warehouses, in our, driver network, delivery networks, making our operations were running smoothly and that we could be there to get the supplies where they needed to be anywhere around the country.
Well, Jane, I'm curious for you because so much of what we've heard throughout this pandemic was about issues regarding the supply chain. And so I'm wondering if that was a challenge for Wayfair in getting those mattresses, those linens, and being able to get them to hospitals that needed it.
Yeah, it really wasn't for us. We were deemed essential operations, as most e-commerce was at the time across the country. And we have such a vast network, and we have warehouses situated all over the country, and we have a great deal of product there, and we're very well positioned, and probably one of very few, if maybe the only company that was with capability to get that kind of product to the places it needed to be that quickly.
So I'm wondering for all of you, what was the biggest challenge in making the switch from what your normal operations are, what you normally produce or sell, to providing or making medical supplies? And how did you overcome that? Wambi, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think there's so many challenges, but I would say probably the biggest ones are just around coordinating a brand new product across all of our teams, all across the world, in terms of being able to iterate at the speed that we needed to, and then balancing the just tremendous amount of risk as an organization to put the financial capital behind all of the supplies and raw materials that we had to order, and kind of getting the alignment through the organization to take that on. I think those are probably the biggest pieces, but I have to say our team has been unbelievable just in terms of the design and the production and getting all of those completely brand new processes in place. So it like everyone else here, it's been a really big team effort.
Okay, and Romina?
Yeah, I think like Wambi said, it was navigating the unknown, right? Like we spend the majority of our time planning and strategizing and thinking ahead. And we normally launch or start working on a launch of a shoe at least a year and a half, 2 years out. So this time around, we were able to put something together in a very quick timeline, and just being comfortable with the unknown was the biggest challenge in so many ways, just not knowing what's going to happen and exactly how we will go about delivering this PPE. But it was not something to focus on, but rather the driver, the engine that actually moved us forward.
And how did you overcome that challenge?
I think, being comfortable with the lack of clarity. It is a situation of a crisis. During crisis, you don't really always have that clarity you're looking for, right? But you have to move quickly and decisively and really focus on the ultimate goal, and be comfortable with not knowing exactly how you're going to get there. I think what made the whole difference was the determination of our team and the culture of our company that enables us to think differently and act quickly, but also be fearless independent, like I said before, right? So that kept it together.
And Jane, I'm wondering, for Wayfair, you mentioned that the supply chain was not as a big challenge for you. Well, what was the big challenge that you had in sort of shifting gears here during this pandemic, and how did you address that?
Yeah, I think like a lot of companies and organizations, it was really about ensuring the safety, right, of our employees first. That was the absolute number one concern and priority for the business, and making sure that we had, all the most extensive safety protocols in place, because we needed our employees to be able to come to work if they were working on the front lines and feel confident and feel comfortable, and their families to feel confident and comfortable that they're going to be safe and they're going to be okay. And so I think that was where we really focused our efforts. We continue to do that every day. So I think that was really the thing that made it possible for us to help the community, serve our customers, and help the community.
Now, I'm wondering what percentage of your company actually shifted to providing or producing these medical supplies. Jane, you can continue and answer that question.
Sure. So, when the pandemic hit, Wayfair has about 16,000 employees globally, and we quickly transitioned thousands of our corporate employees and all of our customer service people completely to home. And then, of course, our frontline workers were needed on the front lines. And so, to pull off these types of things where you're quickly shipping massive, amounts of product to certain locations, obviously that requires folks across the entire business, right, who are managing supply chain or are managing relationships with suppliers, all of that, as well as the folks that are actually packing the boxes, packing the trucks, driving those trucks. So it's hard to say how many people exactly were involved, but it was definitely a big team effort. And I know our employees were very proud to be a part of that and proud that, Wayfair could help.
And Wambi, what about for Lovepop? I mean, what percentage or portion of your company shifted to producing medical supplies?
Yeah, within our leadership team, it quickly consumed, and especially in the very beginning as we were iterating on this 24/7, probably about half of my time in our head of production. So in our leadership team, I think ultimately, including everyone else in there, probably about 30% of our time went towards this for a good portion of the stand-up period. And then within our production team, some of our teams, especially our QA team, I think went mostly towards this initiative, and whereas other parts of our production team weren't really much affected. So it really depended on where you were, but overall, I would say a pretty substantial commitment of our internal team and effort has gone towards this project.
Okay. And what about at New Balance, Romina?
I think it was similar as well. Certainly it was a lot of effort from an associate perspective to make sure that we kept everyone safe while back at work, that everybody respect social distance, that there was the right equipment and the setups for them to do that, and everybody had the right PPE. I think it was a great effort that demanded a lot of attention from an HR perspective, and certainly from a communications perspective, internally and externally. I will say 80 to 90% of the communications team was dedicated to this effort initially to get this right, to get the messaging right, to educate the community, but also informed our associates as to how they will go about coming back to work for these efforts, right? And how we will make sure safety was prioritized throughout the process.
Yeah, I do want to get more into safety and sort of going back to work in a bit. But one thing I do want to ask you all is, I mean, in the end, what is the bottom line? I mean, we know all businesses have to think about the bottom line on some level. So I'm wondering how this pivot that you've made during the pandemic fits into your bottom line. Will you break even or come out ahead? Romina, let's stay with you. How about for New Balance? How does that work out?
Yes, we actually made the PPE available at cost to New Balance. We didn't make any profit out of the facial masks. We wanted them to be available for the healthcare workers in the front line immediately with no barriers whatsoever. So we facilitated that process as much as we could. And after 3 months of making this mask and also increasing our capabilities from a manufacturing perspective, we just last week launched a consumer mask. So it's the New Balance face mask is now available for purchase for the consumer. But before that, and what we continue to do actually for the healthcare community is still at cost. Now it's available for B2B as well, and that's a different price point and opportunity there. But during the crisis, we will continue to serve without generating profits for the company necessarily around that PPE.
Okay, so generating no profits, and you said available to healthcare workers at cost. Can you clarify exactly what you mean by that?
At cost of manufacturing the mask, so acquiring the materials and just working the machinery to make this happen.
And Wambi, how has this worked out for your startup in terms of the bottom line, in terms of breaking even or the cost here?
Yeah, similarly to Romina, I mean, our goal was always to get the biggest quantity we possibly could available at the lowest cost possible. And I think we've been able to deliver substantially below the kind of market prices. I think we'll probably come out a bit ahead in the overall picture although there's still a lot unknown in terms of what our full cost picture is going to be. And our thinking right now is actually it continues to evolve. We don't have consumer versions. I don't think we intend yet to do any consumer versions, but that's really cool. I need to buy one of those masks and see. But we are thinking about whether we're going to continue doing this for the medium term. We're still seeing some really large demands for the gowns at the moment, but it's also taking a lot of energy from our team. And so we have to think about how we can sustain kind of this level of effort going forward.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like you might come out with a little bit of profit here then.
Yes, hopefully.
And what about at Wayfair, Jane? How do things pan out in terms of the cost and the bottom line?
Yeah, similar to what Romina said, much of our product that was shipped was at cost to field hospitals and things like that. Oftentimes state and local federal government can't accept product that's donated. They have to do it at cost. And that was much of that. The other things that we did, though, as a company was we donated $2.3 million to Feeding America to help with the country who were dealing with hunger due to unemployment and things like that. So we had other major initiatives going on in the company where we were making significant, contributions. I think at the end of the day, I think we feel like, all of this is really our brand, and we see it as an investment in the business and our connection to our communities and our consumers. So, it's a very positive thing overall.
Okay. If you're just joining us, we are live streaming this WBUR Town Hall on the role and responsibilities of businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic with Romina Bongiovanni of New Balance, Jane Carpenter of Wayfair, and Wambi Rose of Lovepop. So I want to ask you all, during this pandemic, as all of your companies have shifted to making or providing medical supplies, what steps have you taken to keep employees safe? Jane, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So we've taken really extensive steps, as you might imagine. So everything from, temperature checks to social distancing in our facilities, staggering the shifts of our employees so they're not crossing over different shifts. The big thing I think, though, is having, emergency time off, right? So employees don't have to be worried that if they're going to miss a paycheck. We encourage our employees who are on the front lines that, if they're not feeling well, they should not come to work, and they will be paid for that time. And I think that's really important because you don't think that they're going to have to sacrifice or, not be able to make ends meet and maybe make the wrong decision. So we want to make sure that we keep all of our people safe and that paying folks to stay home if they need to, if they're sick, making sure that everybody's, taking the time to take care of themselves and be healthy. And And what's been really great is that, we've seen that being pretty successful across the field, and employees are taking it really seriously. And I think we need folks to feel confident and feel good about coming to work. And so far, we're doing a pretty good job.
Okay. And Romina, what about at New Balance?
So similarly, we at the beginning of the pandemic, we closed all the operations, stores worldwide, and immediately all the offices started to work from home. Stores were closed, but and then our factories associates went sent home as well, unless they were essential to the mass manufacturing efforts that we started 4 days later. So it started there, and now we continue to evolve as we reopen slowly some of the stores across the country and around the world. There's obviously new measures in place, and we're communicating these to our our community, so that they're aware of what to expect once they walk into stores again, which we're excited to have people back into the stores, but we want to do that safely. There's, of course, PPE It's a must. Everybody is wearing PPE inside the store. There's certain things that are not available anymore, like feeding rooms, for example, right? Those are the type of dynamics that we're faced with, and that's okay, because there's other ways to still experience the purchase process at the store and still walk away with the right product. And many other things like that. Everybody wears masks, and there's also a limited amount of people that we allowed into the stores, and among other things. And I think from an office perspective, what has been beneficial is to stay flexible. Everybody is experiencing this crisis in a different way. And you just have to stay nimble, understanding of the different needs, and continue to lead the team to overcome this together and celebrate the small wins, but over communicate throughout the whole process so that we can be on the same page every time.
Yeah, I would echo that, Romina. I think that the communication piece has been so critical. Be very honest and transparent with everyone, and keep dialogue going all the time, and making sure that you're really understanding how people are feeling, and making sure you're addressing that, and create a culture and environment where people can speak their minds and raise their concerns and have those honest dialogues.
Yeah, and on a similar note, we've gotten a couple audience questions through Slido on this, but just asking and wondering about what happens now that we are reopening, and as more workers are going back into offices. How are you managing your company cultures, transitioning to working remotely? Do you expect all employees to come back into the office again, and again, of course, on the safety end as well? How are you managing that transition, and sort of what is your plan moving forward for how your operations will look like? Wambi, why don't you go ahead and start there?
Yeah, and I think we followed a very similar trajectory to Wayfair and Converse in that respect of kind of closing our stores quickly and going to work from home in the HQ. And then putting in all those procedures in kind of our shipping and fulfillment centers. And so the as we kind of come back here, I think it's been a communication is key, and having that direct line with everybody. We've been doing kind of bi-weekly all hands, and at this moment, it's minimizing any risk to safety is kind of the number one key concern over any other concern. And then where we can, add as much magic into the experience as possible. We were just before we got on the call, we were talking about, we just came out with a new Lovepop mask. So this is what our retail associates are wearing now, our brand ambassadors. We just opened our first location back up at Disney Springs, and we hope to be able to continue that reopening process with everything we're learning there as Massachusetts and New York start to go in a similar direction. And from the HQ perspective, I agree, it's all about flexibility. Take as few risks as we need. At this point, our team is going to be working from home through at the very minimum Labor Day, and then we will start thinking through what it looks like through the end of the year, and really just trying to make sure that we're working hand in hand with the team on exactly what people are comfortable with, and how we get the work done in creative ways.
Okay. And I do want to get to some more audience questions. We have another audience question that came in from Slido that I'll put to you all, which is, brands have been criticized for hollow ad campaigns saying we're in this together. Do you think your support has been sufficient enough to defy this criticism? And I'll just add on to that. What do you think the impact of this pivot that you all have made has been? What have you been hearing? Do you think that you have been able to sort of fill a hole during this pandemic? Jane, why don't you start?
Sure. I mean, I think that we always think about these things about kind of leading with action, right? And, this is actually the first time we've actually gotten out and spoken about any of this publicly. I think that's an important point. Like, I think as a brand, you want to make sure that, you're not focused on you're focused on actually making a difference and doing real things. And I think we have been effective at that. And, as I mentioned, I mean, there's obviously so much done, and you know, an individual company can only help so much. But earlier in the program, the program I'm very, very proud of is the Dinner to Go program, because that's a really kind of cool way that we've been able to, you know, like I said, help our employees by giving them free dinners for them and their families twice a week, which is an awesome thing, right? And it shows that we do care about them, and we care about their families too. But being able to partner with these local small restaurants, and we've gotten such amazing feedback from restaurant owners, like thanking us for this and thanking us for allowing them to keep their business open, and you know, just getting those heartfelt notes, and it means so much to us, right? We don't need publicity for it or anything else. It's like just knowing that we're helping these little local communities where we operate is meaningful. And you know, it's funny, we actually got a note the other day from one of our locations in Texas. We got a letter out of the blue from the Dallas County Commissioner there, who had heard about what we were doing from someone, he goes from a business owner who owned a small restaurant that he goes to church with. And he about it, and he wrote us this really great note about how meaningful it was. And, you know, it's just those little things like make a difference, and we feel good, you know, that we can just help. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
And what about at New Balance, Romina?
I think it was a combination of efforts. We certainly wanted to take the right steps that generated action and deliver results and were meaningful to the situation. For associates, for example, one thing that we did, like, it was Parents' Day, and it was a surprise for associates to just take the day off and be with your parents and juggle the obligation of homeschooling and your job, but then stop for, you know, take a little pause and really enjoy one thing at a time. I think, you know, it was a matter of like moving the right pieces at the right time and staying nimble and flexible to the needs of our community and our associates. And true to who we are.
Have you received feedback, or do you get the sense that what you've been able to provide in terms of the masks that you've been able to produce has really filled a hole or filled a gap here during this pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we get so much feedback from the healthcare community. We got pictures and quotes, and, you know, it has been overwhelming to hear how much this meant to these frontline medical workers that were put in a very hot spot, right? Without all the necessary PPE that was needed to perform the job, as well as other people outside healthcare, maybe nursery homes. It wasn't just for the medical community, but also for people that were more at risk. So we continue to get feedback, and it's super rewarding. It's something that re-energized the whole company. We talk about it in our town halls on a weekly basis and share some of these, because this is the type of commentary and feedback that really keeps the company alive, and especially during these times where a lot of people can feel a little isolated from each other, right? So this brings us all together for the same purpose.
So I'm wondering for you all, what happens next? I mean, you've switched to making supplies for hospitals or providing those supplies. You've developed a process to do that. Now what? Is this something you plan to continue to do after this pandemic? Is there anything that will carry over? What's the plan moving forward? Wambi, how are you thinking about this at LovePop?
Yeah, I think I touched on this a little bit earlier as well. We're currently in the process of evaluating that. Some of it has to do with the FDA's emergency use authorizations governing some of the certifications in the space that apply to what we're doing on the gowns. And some of it has to do with just what do the hospitals need. I think to your point on impact, right? The number of photos that we get from the field is really inspiring, especially after the text messages we were getting, when there was nothing to use. And now when we just last week had a conversation with one of the buyers at one of the big hospital systems in the Northeast that we've delivered a lot of gowns to, And when we started talking about how we're considering what we should do going forward and that we may not continue this process, it was, a plea for us to keep working on this, because it's like the hardest job in the world right now to navigate the supply chain on these items. And so I think that's definitely a big factor that's pulling us to try to figure out how we can support it and make it a sustainable part of our business. But like I said, we're still in evaluation mode, and there's a lot of things to consider.
And Jane, how is Wayfair thinking about this moving forward?
Yeah, so our partnership with the dinners and the local restaurants that we're working through, we've already extended that through the end of September. So we'll see, how long that's needed, and hopefully the situation continues to get better. But and the same with supplies and products. We're well positioned and ready to help wherever we can. And I think we can all hope that those things won't be needed, but we're certainly here if they are.
And Romina, I'm wondering what the thinking is at New Balance, especially as, we've heard the governor say and talk quite a bit about the need for local manufacturing. I'm curious what New Balance is thinking in terms of continuing this production of masks during this pandemic, what the future outlook is in terms of whether any of this will continue beyond this pandemic. How are you thinking about that at New Balance?
So we're continuing actually to develop prototypes for different types of PPE. So that is in the works. We're also working closely with healthcare officials to get through specific requirements for medical grade PPE and facial masks. So we're continuing to be very committed to the development of more PPE as a whole. I think the other aspect of it is just to stay very nimble and be able to facilitate safety for other communities as well. So we're trying to reach further, work harder. From a consumer standpoint, we launched a consumer mask, but we also announced that we're in the process of developing a performance mask or an athletic mask. And hopefully that will help our athletes and everybody that is into sports feel more empowered to exercise and be able to be more comfortable while doing so.
Okay, so it sounds like you're developing different sort of iterations of the mask then.
Yes.
And the next question I have, it's an audience question from Slido directed to you, Romina, and Jane. To Wayfair and New Balance, as major brands that have the luxury of being able to pivot to support, what advice do you have for small businesses that are trying to survive in this moment?
Well, I think to be kind of authentic to who you are as a business, right? So, but also being able to recognize what your strengths are and how you can pivot, right? That's a really, really excellent point. What are you doing that you maybe can modify slightly to, better meet whatever the needs are in this climate or this situation? I think, at that and just trying to understand what the options are important. I think, Ombi seems to be maybe even better versed at that for small businesses trying to figure out how they can just survive and make do. But I think, just trying to be creative and innovative and thinking of new ways. The world's shifting in ways that there are still lots of unmet needs and things happening that need to have a new solution or a new type of whether it be a product or a process. So I think just kind of trying to think through those things.
I think, Romina, from your perspective, yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. I think that's so interesting for small business. I think it's also the natural role of a small business and how they operate, right? You have the flexibility of being more positionless and problem solving, playing that role in the community in addition to playing that role for your business mission. And in times of a crisis, you have the strength and the skills to even overcome more easily than a large corporation because of that. It's just embracing that entrepreneurial spirit. I think that would be my advice. Continue to work hard and act quickly. Be very decisive in your communications with employees and your community stakeholders so that you can identify the right purpose for the company. I think creating alliances is what's going to propel us forward in so many ways, and small business have a very important role to play in that.
Yeah, and Wambi, I should bring you in here as well. I mean, you run a startup. You are a much smaller company, certainly than New Balance and Wayfair. What advice do you have for maybe other startups that are, or other small companies that are, struggling right now and thinking about how they can sort of move forward during this time?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, it's a extremely difficult time. I think I definitely agree with what Romina and Jane both mentioned, which is that as a small company, you have a lot of flexibility and that agility and nimbleness to react to the environment, which is changing so much faster than it has in recent years, and it looks like it's going to continue to be a fast pace in terms of things changing. I think you have that possibility, but at the same time, I also really believe in kind of staying true to that core mission. For us, it's creating magical moments, and so even in everything we've done here, it's been all about how can we make a magical moment out of this. When we designed the face shield, we added the "I'm here for you" and a rainbow on the top of it, so that because we were hearing from the front line that you felt a little impersonal behind all of that PPE and you wanted to get your own personality out there. And so I think I would say the same thing for whatever line of business that you find yourself in. It's about that passion you have for the core mission of what you do, but then how you express and exercise it. You actually have an advantage compared to, I'm sure at Wayfair and New Balance is a little bit harder than what we had to go through in order to get running on this. And I think the smaller you are, the more flexibility you have with that.
Oh, okay. So more nimbleness as a small company is sort of an advantage there, I guess.
Yeah, well, you have to think about the advantages you have, because you have a lot of disadvantages as well. And so I don't know. I'm an optimist by nature, and so just try to figure out how can we make this work.
Okay. And another question from the audience. We've actually gotten a couple questions mentioning this. And so I want to put it to you all. As all leaders are now crisis leaders in the current climate, we've been talking about how you all have pivoted during this COVID-19 crisis. There's another issue that has bubbled up in recent weeks with the Black Lives Matter protests here locally and across the country. How is your leadership handling management in the climate of the COVID-19 pandemic as well as Black Lives Matter? Jane, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for us, the focus has really been on leading with action again, right? Look internally within our organization at, what we can do to really affect change, what we can do to make sure that we're being true to our values and beliefs, and then also communicating that with empathy and trying to have that dialogue, with our employees, with our communities, with our customers, right? So that open dialogue, and really thinking about, instead of thinking about, what we're going to say, thinking about what we're going to do. And we're already doing a lot of great things, but how do we build on that, right? And how do we take this moment, this opportunity to really elevate the conversation and to really put some more fire behind what we want to do and what we want to accomplish?
Yeah. And Romina, how about at New Balance?
No, I agree. There's not really a quick fix for the systematic change that society needs right now. But it starts with listening. I think that's our first and most important step, listening and applying those learnings on an ongoing basis to help establishing and developing and advancing diverse talent in general in all sectors of the business. I think that's the very first step. And then, as leaders, we all need to commit to diversity and inclusion. So there's not excuse for that. And we need to create accountability in all areas of the business and all the way to the top. I think there's a great opportunity to do that and more. And also be honest. Let's have the hard conversations where we need to have it and learn from it and create a platform where all people can feel welcomed, listened to, and stay connected to one another to advance the same mission.
Yeah, we had just last week, one of the small things, but I think important things that we're doing is we launched a Courageous Conversation series. And in this particular conversation was, our CEO, our lead and founder of our ERG, our Way Black ERG for Black employees, and then the sponsor of that, and then a number of employees that just wanted to share their personal stories, right? So Romina, you mentioned listening and learning, and we're really trying to embrace that. So having that conversation that everyone could listen to and hear people's personal stories and their personal accounts and just start to educate people and open up that dialogue and make sure that nobody feels like there's any topic that's off the table and that nobody feels uncomfortable bringing something up at work, right? All of that stuff is so important. So, there's big things you can do and there's little things you can do. And I think it's a combination of both. And I think you've got to start with a lot of the little things and pay attention to it and see it through. So that's how we're looking at it.
How are you looking at things over at Lovepop, Wambi?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to talk about Black Lives Matter and what's been going on without acknowledging that we are very far away from where we need to be as a country in terms of racial equality, and that standing by silently as a brand with the kind of conversations that we have on all other topics of equality all the time. You can't stand by silently now, and you have to be actively anti-racist, and you have to really do and lead with your actions. I think it's been a time in the last few weeks to make sure that it's clear where we are and communicate with our team and really create the space for learning and then it's really a time of doing. And so I really agree with Jane. It's, your actions have to speak louder than your words. And I do believe there's a lot of positive coming out of the conversations, but obviously it's a really challenging situation and a lot of work that all of us need to do.
Yeah, and certainly we've seen some of those disparities playing out even within the coronavirus pandemic in terms of infection rates and sort of the communities and areas that are hardest hit. We have just a few more minutes. I do want to ask you all on a personal note, what are you most looking forward to getting back to now as we're reopening and thinking ahead as we move further into the reopening process and closer to a vaccine? Romina, why don't you start? Yeah.
I think I'm looking forward to not going back to where we were before. To be honest, embracing all this change and owning it and learning from it and applying all of that to a greater way of working and a greater way of leading society and the business.
And Jane?
Yeah, I agree with Romina. There are some silver linings, right, that I think everyone's discovering, and I think keeping those things forward and going forward. On a personal note, I have 3 college kids home and a senior in high school, so I'm just hoping they'll all go back to school in the fall.
And Wambi?
Yeah, I'm very much with Romina here. I think the last few months have really brought our team together, despite the fact that physically we're further apart than ever. And I think there's a lot of good that will come from that, and I think there's a lot of opportunities right now to really think about how we chart our future. And so I'm very excited about that, as much as the last few months have been very challenging.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a really great conversation. I want to sneak in one more quick audience question, just as a follow-up to what we were just previously talking about. This is from an audience member who asked, in terms of Black Lives Matter and hard action, as we've sort of been talking about changes moving forward, how can your brands take action in the world at large the way you have with COVID-19 during this pandemic? And we'll do a quick round. So Wambi, why don't you start, and then we'll go to Jane and then Romina.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in our company, there's really three main areas. It's in our people and in our team, and what that team looks like, as well as how that team is trained in our culture and everything. There, it's in our marketing. What messages we choose to put out into the world, and in our conversations with our customers. And we have a lot of one-on-one conversations with customers every day. But I think the main piece of our business is we create products that make magical moments. And so I think actually how we are thinking about developing our product, what voices are going into that product development, and just what occasions we cover. I think that's the place where we really have an outsized impact, and where we are looking at kind of a lot of substantial improvements.
And Jane.
Yeah, and I think kind of to echo some of the things that Wambi said, I think, it's a focus on our people. It's a focus on, developing talent, making sure that we're rooting out any unconscious bias in our organization, right? And education and all of that for our, we have an inclusive environment where anyone can succeed. And I think marketing is important too, right? Making sure that our marketing represents our customers, making sure that we're showing people in our advertisements, in our social media feeds, like all of that stuff is really important. And then the community engagement, and already one of the cool things that we've done is in the past month, with this another small thing, but immediate thing is, we doubled the match on employee contributions to charitable organizations that are helping promote, Black Lives Matter, and all of the organizations that are out there to support the movement. So, it's across the board. It's really not one single thing.
And Romina, how about at New Balance? How can brands take, and from your perspective, how can brands take action, and you take action with dealing with issues around Black Lives Matter the same way that you were able to pivot with COVID-19 during this pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like everybody said, there's quite a few areas. I think I will start with your investments. Not only on donations, I think those are important, and you need to prioritize them because the financial resource is always needed and welcomed, but also in the way you invest in how to build the future of the industry in whatever industry you're in, right? Like to make sure that there's scholarships and there's internship opportunities for all kinds of people with different talents and different backgrounds. And then invest also in the development of your existing workforce and how they go about training and hiring new individuals that join the organization. I think that's a key one. I think a lot of training is needed for everyone in the industry. And we're taking a step around that, right? Prioritizing how we go about hiring diverse talent. And then just being honest with yourself. You're not going to fix everything right away. It's going to take time. This is a long-term commitment. It's not going to be fixed by next month or next year even, but just having accountability all the way to the top is what's going to drive the success. And lastly, what I will say is make sure that you're tracking your progress, and make sure that you have third-party reports as to how you're tracking, because it brings a lot of credibility and also opens the door for clarity as to how you can do better. So,
yeah, and I'll add to that, Romina. I think that creating that transparency, right, within your company, your employees about what your goals are. I think acknowledging that there's done, and then being transparent in the progress and how that's moving along.
Okay. We'll have to leave it there. That's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you to our guests, Jane Carpenter, Wambi Rose, and Romina Bongiovanni. Thank you so much for this great conversation. And viewers, thank you so much for tuning in and for your great questions. I'm Zeninjor Enwemeka. I hope you'll join us again next Tuesday at 6 when WBUR senior political reporter Anthony Brooks and senior news correspondent Kimberly Atkins lead a conversation about COVID-19 and the presidential election. You can learn how to submit your questions and register for that town hall at wbur.org/events. Until then, stay well, take care, good night.
Thanks, Zeninjor.
Yeah.
Thank you.